Hello, my name's Dave Emery, and in the next 2 half-hour segments, we're going to revisit a topic that I've dealt with in the past, namely the Third Reich's connections to the occult, and beyond that, some connections between neo-Nazism, or so-called neo-Nazism, and aspects of the New Age and the occult. We're also going to be taking a look at some aspects of the history of the Third Reich and why it has been able to survive into the present time. In the interests of time, because we do have a lot of material to cover, I'm going to get right into the subject material. We're going to be talking for the next 2 half hours about a woman named Savitri Devi. Her name is spelled capital S-A-V-I-T-R-I, last name capital D-E-V-I. Although of European birth, she was something of an Indianophile, to coin a term. She was very much taken with India, which she saw as a prototype of, quote, Aryan, unquote, civilization, and she became wooed to the Nazi cause. Her biography was authored by Nicholas Goodrick Clark, last name capital G-O-O-D-R-I-C-K hyphen C capital C-L-A-R-K-E, and Nicholas Goodrick Clark has written a very important book called Hitler's Priestess, Savitri Devi, the Hindu-Aryan Myth, and Neo-Nazism. The book was published in hardcover by New York University Press, copyright 1998. The ISBN number is 0-8147-3110-4. We're going to begin by taking a look at some material from a publication a publication that is issued by Samizdat Publishers. That's capital S-A-M-I-S-D-A-T. That's a Nazi publishing house that is run by a fellow named Ernst Zundel, a German expatriate who lives in Canada, last name capital Z-U-N-D-E-L. Zundel is one of the most prolific of the new Nazi publishers, and in 1982 he helped to publicize the activities of Savitri Devi in his Samizdat publication. Turning to Hitler's Priestess by Nicholas Goodrick Clark, we read, in late 1982, Ernst Zundel, the founder-proprietor of the neo-Nazi Samizdat Publishers in Toronto, publicized the availability of a set of 5 two-hour cassettes of live interviews with Savitri Devi and a brand-new edition of her out-of-print classic, The Lightning in the Sun, published in 1958. The notice was mailed worldwide on card flyers, and it is worth quoting in its breathless entirety. And here is the quote. The Hitler cult revealed. Discovered alive in India. Hitler's guru. For serious students of the occult. You can now purchase the complete set of tape cassette recorded live interviews with Hitler guru Savitri Devi at her home in India. Hear in her own words the narration of a prophetic pilgrimage along the edge of the cosmic abyss. Watch the clouds of evil scatter under the lightning of cosmic justice and the sun of cosmic truth. Read her shocking and most recently published manuscript, The Lightning in the Sun, which exposes the tangled roots of Nazism for all to see. Discover through her the secret Nazi pyramid connection with Pharaoh Akhenaten and the ancient cult of the sun. Learn the real significance of Genghis Khan's evil role in history, his incredible significance in the present. Discover the hidden springs of Hitler's manic will to power, his mystical bond with the dark forces of time and destiny. Pursue the outlines of evil in its awesome cosmic context. Decipher now the encoded workings of the Nazi mind. Perceive how Hitler saw the workings of the universe through human sacrifice, vegetarianism, Aryanism, the cyclic view of history, the children of violence, the will to survive and to conquer, the seed of truth, gods on earth, Kalki the Avenger. Were ancient Sanskrit laws of the universe compiled in the Bhagavad Gita the secret source of Nazi strength? The amazing answers to these riddles are now at hand. Read them in The Lightning in the Sun, Hitler guru Savitri Devi's huge illustrated 448-page illumination of occult Nazi wisdom and prophecy. The Samizdat publicity was a resounding finale to a long and eventful life begun early in the century in the beautiful old wall city of Lyon in France. And skipping down, Samizdat's presentation of Savitri Devi was evidently part of this strategy designed to entice new audiences with the neo-Nazi message. Ancient mythology and pyramid secrets, Eastern religion, vegetarianism, and green ideas, the very currency of the burgeoning New Age with its interest in exotic religion, spiritual truths, and a worship of nature, could be exploited as bait for the young, unwary, or simply curious. By the late 1970s, the historical experience of the Third Reich was quickly receding into the past. As popular literature and films ably demonstrated, Nazism was becoming something mythical, even fantastic, and also plastic, that could be molded and combined with novel associations and thereby given new meanings. By republishing the work of Savitri Devi, Zundel aimed to create a new cultic interest in Hitler, linking him to ancient mysteries, the world of nature, and powerful religious symbols drawn from the Orient. Her ideas have since built unlikely bridges between neo-Nazism and the New Age. Savitri Devi viewed nature in the Hindu fashion as a violent pageant of creation and destruction in which man held no special rights. A cloyingly sentimental love of animals stood in marked contrast to her misanthropic contempt for non-Aryan humans, the weak, and the infirm. Himmler and Rosenberg, among other leading Nazis, also combined a concern for animals with their monstrous blueprints to eliminate all, quote, unworthy, unquote, human life. The Impeachment of Man, 1959, her book devoted to a thoroughgoing rejection of the man-centered creeds of Judaism and Christianity, was republished by the far-right Noontide Press in America in 1991. Interrupting, that is the publishing arm of the Nazi Liberty Lobby organization. Its best-known publication is the Spotlight newspaper, not to be confused with the British Searchlight. Similar name, the British Searchlight, however, is anti-fascist. Continuing. Here, the brutality of social Darwinism meets both the green cult of nature and the antisocial excesses of animal rights activists. Again, the amoral worship of beauty and force implicit in Nazi thinking finds new alliances with Hinduism, the cult of Shiva, and deep ecology, that radical current of ecological thought that condemns modern man as the scourge of nature. Savitri Devi was a French woman of Greek-English birth who had become an admirer of German National Socialism in the late 1920s and was obsessed by the Aryan myth. Deeply impressed by its racial heritage and caste system, she had emigrated to India in the early 1930s to acquaint herself at first hand with what she regarded as the cradle of the Aryan race. There she spent the years of the Third Reich and the Second World War in expectation of a global Axis victory, after which she and her Brahmin husband expected to help in the establishment of a racial new order in the subcontinent. During these years, Savitri Devi elaborated an extraordinary synthesis of Hindu religion and Nordic racial ideology involving the polar origin of the Aryans, the cycle of the ages, and the incarnation of the last avatar of Vishnu in Adolf Hitler. She regarded the Third Reich as, quote, the Holy Land of the West, the stronghold of regenerate Aryandom, unquote. Her ideas were actually representative of a certain section of high-caste Brahmin Indian society that hated the Raj and was impressed by Hitler's dramatic challenge of British imperial power. Such Indians were fascinated by the Nazi swastika, a holy Indian symbol, and fondly recalled the German tradition of Sanskrit scholarship since the early 19th century. However, it seemed unlikely that these ideas, so far into the actuality of National Socialism, could ever find supporters in the West. The situation changed with the total defeat and collapse of the Third Reich in 1945. In its wake, Savitri Devi pursued a long and busy career as a neo-Nazi apologist and ideologue in Europe. She was arrested by the British occupational forces in Germany for Nazi propaganda activities and imprisoned. Her extravagant Hitler cult, her Hindu Nordicist doctrine of the Aryan race, and unswerving loyalty to the Nazi cause found numerous devotees among her fellow prisoners and demoralized Germans. After her release, she befriended leading personalities of the Nazi regime such as the air ace Hans Ulrich Rudel and the commando leader Otto Skorzeny, who both played an active role in maintaining a global Nazi support network. She met with Nazi émigrés and fugitives in Spain, Egypt, and the Middle East. She wrote books hymning the Third Reich and National Socialism, accounts of her propaganda campaign and detention, and a highly charged emotional memoir of her, quote, pilgrimage, unquote, to Hitler shrines and other places of Nazi association in Austria and Germany during the 1950s. Savitri Devi, A foreigner who had not even directly experienced life under National Socialism supplied a new religious cult for the vanished Führer and an international rationale for Nazi-Aryan ideology that effectively transcended the narrow realities of German nationalism and anti-Semitism in the Third Reich. Defeated and humiliated Germans who could neither grasp the disgrace of their country nor accept the vilification of an idealized leader found comfort in Savitri Devi's rapturous approval. Hardened practitioners of Nazi terror and persecution were flattered by her doctrine of universal Aryan mission. The prosaic and gruesome aspects of Nazi practice during the years of tyranny yielded before a mythological tableau in which Hitler was deified and his regime invested with new religious significance. Nor was her appeal confined to die-hard German Nazis and survivors of the Third Reich. The existence of small but persistent neo-fascist and neo-Nazi movements after 1945 in Europe, the United States, and South America is a well-documented fact. While these tiny groups and parties continue to peddle racism, anti-Semitism, and appeals for an authoritarian state, the universal post-war condemnation of Hitler and National Socialism is a major obstacle to their ever-gaining popular acceptance. The extermination of European Jewry has become the horrific hallmark of the Third Reich, forever tainting any attempts to rehabilitate National Socialist ideology. By her outright inversion of this accepted moral scheme, Savitri Devi became a heroine of the neo-Nazi scene. In emotionally laden prose, she transformed the negative attributes of Nazism into a religious cult of cosmic significance. The Third Reich was presented as a rehearsal for the Aryan paradise, and Adolf Hitler was celebrated as an avatar, a supernatural figure whose intervention in the cycle of the ages was essential to the restoration of the Golden Age. What we're going to do now is to take a look at some of the historical background which led Savitri Devi to form something of an ideological bridge between India and Nazism, and in particular some of the occult mythology of Nazism. One of the elements which led the Third Reich, which enabled the Third Reich, I should say, to gain significant inroads among Third World populations was the fact that many of these populations lived in countries that were colonies of either France and or Great Britain. Such was obviously the case with India up until the end of World War II. India was, of course, a British colony, and that was greatly resented by the Indians, who looked to the Nazis and to the former Soviet Union as well as anti-imperialist opposition to Great Britain. I'm going to concern myself here only with the Nazi influence in India, because the Soviet Union, of course, no longer exists. Of Nazi influence in India, and bear in mind that the anti-British and anti-colonial aspect here was what the Nazis exploited, as well as gaining political currency from the swastika symbol, Nicholas Goodrich Clark writes as follows: "It was with amazement and joy that Savitri Devi first observed pictures of the Führer on the household altar of Indian families. When she asked Srimat Swami Satyananda, the president of the Hindu mission in Calcutta, if she might make reference to Hitler and Mein Kampf in her official lectures, he replied that Hitler was for them an incarnation of Vishnu, the god who keeps things from rushing to destruction, who keeps things back and goes against time. She was welcome to say what she liked in her lectures, provided that she said it from a Hindu point of view." Satyananda repeated this view of Hitler in 1942, adding that they needed National Socialism in India. She encountered similar pro-Hitler attitudes among many other educated Brahmins beside Asit Krishna Mukherjee, and even among illiterate Sudras. Satyananda's reference to Hitler as an, quote, incarnation of God, unquote, and the, quote, savior of the world, unquote, were in fact commonplace among high-caste Hindus. Writing of his impressions of university life in India during the 1950s, Agananda Bharati declared that the active Hindu loves all dictators due to incurable hero worship. This he attributed to the avatar idea, that in every powerful man there is some cosmic power that manifested itself in the god-kings and heroes of the epics and mythology. But Hitler was especially popular, particularly with the aggressive nationalists, for he trounced the British in the early years of the war. Also, Hitler proclaimed the superiority of the Aryan, which is how the Hindu sees himself. Last, the memory of Max Müller's Aryan researches was still fresh. Hitler was the leader of the Sanskrit-knowing Germans. Barati was exceptionally well placed to observe this sympathy. Born Leopold Fischer in 1923, he spent his youth in Vienna and embarked early on the scholarly study of India. During the war, he was a member of Subhas Chandra Bose's Indian Legion, serving mainly in France and Germany. Embracing Hinduism, he became a monk in the Dashanami order, originally founded by Sankara in 800, and pursued an academic career at Banaras Hindu University after the war. He has also written on Golwarkar's Rashitraya Swayamsevak Sangh, or RSS, and Hindu fascism. Subhas Chandra Bose, by the way, is somebody we dealt with in RFA program number 7. He was a Hindu nationalist who turned to fascism because he saw the Third Reich and Imperial Japan as India's liberators. And as seen here, he actually put together a fighting group that was composed of Indian prisoners of war who had been captured from the British Army and then turned to the Nazi cause. And in addition, the RSS, which had its genesis as an anti-British and Indian nationalist group, eventually metamorphosed into an Indian fascist group. Before turning to the subject of the Indian Legion of Subhas Chandra Bose, actually an Indian component in the Nazi military, we're going to take a look at former Indian Prime Minister Nehru's assessment of the RSS and its role as the leading Indian fascist organization. Turning once again to Hitler's Priestess by Nicholas Goodrich Clark, we read, Nehru and other commentators have seen the RSS as an Indian version of fascism. By the late 1930s, the Hindu nationalists were taking note of European fascism. Savarkar approved the German occupation of the Sudetenland on the grounds of common blood, and the Nazi party paper, the Völkischer Beobachter, carried a feature on him. When Madhav Sadishav Golwarkar, shortly to succeed Hedgewar as RSS leader, published his book We or Our Nationhood Defined in 1939, the RSS message of ethnic nationalism was unequivocal. Golwarkar rejected Congress's liberal concept of nationhood and quoted Bluntschli at length. The Anschluss of Austria and the annexation of the Sudetenland were, quote, logical, unquote, conforming with, quote, the true nation concept, unquote. Race was the most important ingredient of nationality for Golwarkar, who was deeply impressed by Hitler's ideology. And in addition to the RSS Indian fascist organization, there was, as we mentioned, an actual Indian Legion recruited from among Indian prisoners of war captured from the British Army that fought with the Nazis. Nicholas Goodrich Clark describes this in Hitler's Priestess as follows. By early 1942, the Wehrmacht had begun training Indian POWs at 2 camps in Germany. These trainees for an Indian Legion were drawn from POWs originally captured by the Italians in North Africa and eventually numbered some 3,000. Bose's recruiting speech included the words, quote, Hitler is your friend, a friend of the Aryans, and you will march to India as your motherland's liberators, unquote. An oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler with reference to Subhas Chandra Bose was established, and the title Netaji, leader, was adopted for Bose. The Indian Legionnaires wore German uniforms with eagle and swastika badges in which they recognized their own religious symbol. The German High Command anticipated that the Indian Legion would be used for commando-type operations in the Middle East and eventually in Afghanistan and in the northwest frontier province of India. I would note that eventually Subhas Chandra Bose became somewhat disillusioned with the Indian attitude, with the Nazi attitude towards Indians, when he saw the very shoddy treatment that the Indians received in Germany proper, where they were looked upon as subhumans because of their dark skin. I would note, too, as we're about to see, the appeal of Nazism for people in the Middle East, Arabs in particular, also had its origins in anti-colonialism, because many of the territories in the Middle East were also British colonies, and for a time at least, and even on up into the present period, many Arabs have an affinity with Nazism going back to this anti-colonial period. Obviously, anti-Israeli sentiment and anti-Nazi anti-Semitism has also formed a common bond. In RFA 22 and in the two-part miscellaneous archive series about the fascist third position, we took a look at Haj Amin al-Husseini, the self-proclaimed Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and the first leader of the Palestinian national movement, himself, like Subhas Chandra Bose, a key Nazi spy. And we should note that Haj Amin al-Husseini was actually a major in the SS and recruited several Muslim Waffen-SS divisions for the Nazis. And also we should note that just as the Nazis themselves were actively contemptuous of the Indians, Hitler himself actually referred to the Arabs as, quote, lacquered half-apes who ought to be whipped, unquote. This, at least for a time, did not deter the Arabs from their pro-Nazi sentiments. The Arab Nazi connection, and in particular the Egyptian Nazi connection, is something we dealt with in RFA program number 22, and its origins in anti-British, anti-colonial sentiment are described by Nicholas Goodrick Clark as follows in the book Hitler's Priestess. The emergence of the Middle East as a haven for old Nazis during the 1950s had its roots in the anti-British and pro-Axis attitudes of Vichy Syria, Rashid Ali in Iraq, Mohammed Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and even King Farouk of Egypt during the war. United by a common hatred of Jewry, the Third Reich had taken the Palestinian Mufti under its protection following the Allied invasion of Iraq, and he had lived throughout the year in a luxurious suite at the Hotel Adlon in Berlin. Hitler had enjoyed quite a following among the nationalist youth of Egypt during the war, after Nasiri Nasser, the later president's brother, had published an Arab edition of Mein Kampf in 1939, describing its author as, quote, the strongest man of Europe, unquote. Even after the defeat of the Third Reich, Arab feelings remained very warm toward the Germans, who were still regarded as potential allies against British colonial power in the region. Egypt became a favored destination for old Nazis in search of responsible jobs in high office. King Farouk had been impressed by his palace garage mechanics recruited from Afrika Korps POWs and wondered what he might achieve with officers from the elite units of the Gestapo and SS who had fought so hard against the hated British. A number of Nazi experts who had escaped the Allied dragnet were hired by the king as military, financial, and technical advisors. This Nazi influence in Egypt was to survive its royal patron, for the young Egyptian officers who planned the military coup d'etat that ousted King Farouk in January of 1952 were themselves great admirers of the Germans and availed themselves of further large-scale imports of ex-Nazi expertise. Note, please, that later that Gamal Abdel Nasser's brother, Nasiri Nasser, published the Arab edition of Mein Kampf. I would note in passing that both Nasser and his successor, Anwar Sadat, had been German spies in World War II. One can annotate that from Ladislas Farago's best-selling book, The Game of the Foxes. What we're going to look at next is Savitri Devi's connections with two of the guiding lights of post-World War II Nazi activism, both of them key functionaries in what I have termed the Underground Reich, literally a Third Reich gone underground. The first of these is Luftwaffe pilot Hans Ulrich Rudel, who was one of the most decorated of the Third Reich's war heroes. He became one of the principal leaders of the post-World War II Nazi underground, and he had very strong connections with Savitri Devi. Turning once again to Hitler's Priestess, we read, after her return to Germany in 1953, Savitri Devi made numerous contacts in this revanchist and nostalgic milieu of Nazi diehards. Foremost among these was Colonel Hans Ulrich Rudel, whom she frequently visited at Hanover and came to know well. More about the Rudel-Savitri Devi connection. When Savitri Devi first met Hans Ulrich Rudel, he was already perhaps the most popular and visible figure of the neo-Nazi scene in the young German Republic. His contacts among old Nazis in South America were extensive, and he was a key player in the Nazi clandestine groups in Spain and Egypt. Although an activist by nature, Rudel could not help but be impressed by Savitri Devi's praise of Nazism as an international racist movement, a notion well suited to the clandestine and dispersed nature of post-war Nazi conspiracy. She met him several times at Hanover, completing her manuscript of The Lightning and the Sun on the occasion of a visit in March of 1956. By the way, in RFA Program 22, we took a look at the massive, actually in RFA Programs 4 and 22, we took a look at the massive Nazi presence in Egypt. One can access that information from those particular archive shows. Of Savitri Devi's connections to Otto Skorzeny, the Nazi commando leader, SS officer, again one of the most decorated of the Third Reich military functionaries, and beyond that, and even more importantly, the main post-war leader of the Odessa SS underground, and also a key functionary of the Reinhard Gehlen Nazi spy outfit, which jumped to the CIA at the end of World War II. Turning once again to Hitler's priestess, after docking at the Great French Port, through which she had so often passed en route to Greece, India, and Egypt, she traveled directly into Spain. Once again, Hans Ulrich Rudel had secured her a top-level introduction into the neo-Nazi network by sending her books Gold in the Furnace and The Lightning in the Sun to his colleague Otto Skorzeny in Madrid. Of the Skorzeny-Savitri Devi connection, we read, Skorzeny regarded Savitri Devi as an exceptional ideologist on behalf of a revived Nazi international and invited her to visit him in Madrid on her return to Europe. They evidently found plenty to discuss, for she remained his guest for 6 weeks. Skorzeny was convinced that conditions were growing more favorable for a fresh wave of neo-fascist sympathy in Europe. The loss of the Congo had unleashed revanchist sentiments in Belgium, and now, in late 1960, French extremists were seeking to delay any settlement of the conflict in Algeria. There was a widespread hope among neo-fascists that the Algerian issue would repeat the ideological conflict of the Spanish Civil War on a European stage. The fascist organization Jeune Europe supported the Organisation Armée Secrète, or OAS, in Algeria, and later found safe hideouts for its leaders. The increased levels of colored immigration in Great Britain were leading to a racial backlash and further support for far-right groups. New German neo-Nazi groups and youth movements were being established, including the Bund, Vaterländische Jugend, and I'm not even going to try this next name, sponsored by Skorzeny's friend Karl-Heinz Priester. Skorzeny had read Savitri Devi's books and was impressed by their praise of German virtues in the general context of a revival of the white Aryan world. He felt she was someone to be encouraged, someone who should write more for the Nazi International. And we're going to take a look at Savitri Devi's connections to contemporary Nazi activists in the 1960s and up, and also some of the philosophical connections between Nazism and some aspects, again, note some aspects of the New Age, in the next half-hour segment. I've alluded to some of the archive shows. Those and the other tapes that I've done over the years are available from a tape duplication service called Spitfire. That's one word, Spitfire. It's located at P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, zip code 95005. Email spitfire at ix.netcom.com. There's a list and description of the various programs available from Spitfire on the Spitfire website at spitfirelist.com, which is equipped with real audio. People can email me at my home base station in the South San Francisco Bay Area at demory@kfjc.org. Okay, demory@kfjc.org. That concludes this broadcast. My name's Dave Emery. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emery, and in the next half-hour segment, we're going to continue with our analysis of a woman who was not only a major inspiration to post-World War II Nazism, but someone who has formed some very significant and ominous links between some elements, again, note my use of the term elements, of New Age philosophy and Nazism. That woman's name was Savitri Devi. She was of mixed Greek and French origin, but she eventually became infatuated with India and, in turn, became consumed with the Hindu-Aryan myth. We're going to continue with this biography of Savitri Devi that we were dealing with in our last half-hour segment. That book is called Hitler's Priestess, Savitri Devi, the Hindu-Aryan Myth, and Neo-Nazism. The book was authored by Nicholas Goodrick Clarke, last name Goodrick, hyphen, capital Clarke. It was published in hardcover by New York University Press, copyright 1998, and the ISBN number is 0-8147-3110-4. By the way, Savitri Devi is capital S-A-V-I-T-R-I and capital D-E-V-I. At the conclusion of the last half-hour segment, we were taking a look at Savitri Devi's very close links with two of the most significant leaders of the post-World War II Nazi underground, both of them, by the way, military heroes of the Third Reich, and also people who are very closely connected with not closely connected with, but are prime functionaries of what I have termed the Underground Reich, namely former Luftwaffe pilot Hans-Ulrich Rudel, and also former SS Commando Otto Skorzeny, one of the leaders of the Odessa and also a key functionary of the Reinhard Gehlen Nazi spy outfit that jumped to U.S. intelligence at the end of World War II. What we're going to look at next is Savitri Devi's links with so-called neo-Nazis. I don't like the term. They're simply the next generation, but that is the term that has come into a popular usage. In addition to being tied in, very closely connected to the old guard, Savitri Devi was and is a leading light to, quote, neo-Nazis, unquote. Nicholas Goodrick Clark writes about this as follows. Through her divination of Hitler and National Socialism, Savitri Devi became a leading light of the international neo-Nazi underground from the early 1960s onward. She was a confidant of Colin Jordan, the flamboyant leader of the National Socialist movement in Britain, and his henchman John Tyndall, capital T-Y-N-D-A-L-L, who heads the British National Party today. She knew Lincoln Rockwell, the founder of the American Nazi Party, and in August 1962 she attended the notorious Cotswold Camp in Gloucestershire that acted as the founding meeting of the World Union of National Socialists, or WUNS. In the late 1960s, her books were reprinted in National Socialist World, the organ of the WUNS, published by Lincoln Rockwell and William Pierce. I would note that William Luther Pierce is the head of the National Alliance, the most important contemporary American Nazi group. He also, the publishing arm of that organization, publishes not only the Turner Diaries, authored by William Pierce, and the blueprint for the Nazi group The Order, and also for Timothy McVeigh and company in the Oklahoma City bombing, but William Pierce and National Vanguard Books also publish the book Serpent's Walk, which I have accessed so often. That also, like the Turner Diaries, is much more than the novel it purports to be. It appears to be a blueprint and a manifesto for the contemporary Nazi movement. The book Serpent's Walk, discussed at considerable length in many past broadcasts, was about a Nazi takeover of the United States in the mid-21st century by the descendants of the SS, who go underground to form a flight capital organization, build up their economic power, buy into the American opinion-forming media, infiltrate the U.S. Army, and then take over the United States after a biological warfare attack by genetically engineered viruses of ostensible Russian origin, wipe out much of the American population, the president and the vice president, in particular people on both coasts of the United States and in major cities. This is followed by a declaration of martial law by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who has become president. He is a sympathizer with the Nazis and who invites them into a ruling coalition, and they take over the United States. Note here the connection between William Pierce and Savitri Devi. The book Serpent's Walk is actually, in many ways, it borrows heavily on Indian mythology, and that's what the title comes from. It's from a Hindu myth about a battle between a cobra and a mongoose. Continuing with the text of Hitler's Priestess by Nicholas Goodrick Clark, we read, and this is in discussion of the book National Socialist World. In the pages of the magazine, she was credited with a, quote, mysterious and unfailing wisdom according to which nature lives and creates, the impersonal wisdom of the primeval forest and of the ocean depths, and of the spheres in the dark fields of space which Adolf Hitler made the basis of a practical regeneration policy of worldwide scope. By the 1980s, Savitri Devi had assumed the status of a cult figure herself on the neo-Nazi scene. Her eclectic ideas deriving from Hinduism, the myth of the Aryan race, Germanophilia, and adoration, the word is not too strong for Adolf Hitler, supplied a new mystique for that sinister minority of Nazi apologists in various countries around the world. Following her death in 1982, her ashes were placed in a Nazi shrine at Lincoln Rockwell's headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. Ernst Zundel, the German-Canadian publisher of Holocaust revisionism, sold her books and taped interviews in mass editions to young German neo-Nazis. Miguel Serrano, the former Chilean ambassador and pioneer of, quote, esoteric Hitlerism, unquote, paid fulsome tribute to her inspiration in his own books about the Hitler avatar. Nazi Satanist groups and skinheads in Europe, America, and New Zealand cultivate her memory and ideas today. In Savitri Devi and her entourage, one finds an articulate statement of the Hitler cult that defines the unholy theology of neo-Nazism. And of Savitri Devi's inspirations and of some of the things that led her to become contemptuous of humans, sympathetic to animals, and particularly contemptuous of democracy, we read of her childhood in France. She was contemptuous of the French Revolution and the Republican pride of the French. She regarded the ideals of equality, liberty, and fraternity as specious, and was once punished at school for making an obscene gesture at the plaque displaying the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Above all, she had a great love of animals. From the age of 5, she voiced concern about man's cruelty to animals, animal experiments, circuses, and the fur trade. While still a schoolgirl, she abjured meat-eating and insisted that her mother prepare vegetarian food for her. The peasant torture of cats in France, a folk practice based on medieval superstition, disgusted her and turned her further against mankind. This affection for animals and her feelings of misanthropy led her to mistrust and eventually reject the man-centered nature of Western beliefs and values. This attitude became the hallmark of her Weltanschauung, that, by the way, translates as worldview. What we're going to look at next is Savitri Devi's significant influence on the New Age, and beyond that, the confluence between her fascist philosophy, or her brand of fascist philosophy, and some aspects of New Age philosophy, and also green philosophy, that is to say, pro-ecology philosophy. I want to stress that I'm not in any way implying that all or even most of either New Age or green philosophy is fascist, but nonetheless there are some very, very strong connections between some elements of both and fascism, and I think people who value both aspects, both green philosophy and New Age religion, should be keenly aware of the potential dangers in that regard. Savitri Devi was not only very closely connected to people like Otto Skorzeny and Hans Ulrich Rudel, George Lincoln Rockwell, and William Pierce. She also is held in high regard by some aspects of the New Age, including the Rosicrucians based right here in San Jose. We read about this in Hitler's Priestess as follows. Savitri Devi's influence on international neo-Nazism and other hybrid strains of mystical fascism has been continuous since the mid-1960s and beyond her death into the 1990s. But the very eccentricity of her thought, combining as it does Aryan supremacism and anti-Semitism with Hinduism, animal rights, and a fundamentally biocentric view of life, has led to strange alliances in radical ideology. Indications of her potential appeal to occult, neo-pagan, ecological, and New Age groups are apparent in the interest shown by Maillat, Boucher, Serrano, and Mason in her ideas. Those are all contemporary fascist leaders. In their writings, paganism, magic, and the natural order act as a foil for a cleansing wave of fascist violence that will sweep away a corrupt humanity, leaving only Aryans in possession of a pristine world. Their thought is undeniably fascist in inspiration, but her ideas also hold an appeal for, quote, alternative, unquote, movements whose inspiration is far removed from such sources. In 1954, the ancient and mystical order of the Rosicrucians, or AMORC, America's leading Rosicrucian occult order, published a second edition of A Son of God. That, by the way, is one of Savitri Devi's titles. Founded in 1915 by H. Spencer Lewis, AMORC offers a non-denominational approach to ancient wisdom teachings. In his early years, the American founder had been involved in theosophy and several occult lodges in Britain, as well as with Aleister Crowley and his magical Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. By the way, Aleister Crowley, the OTO, and theosophy have also had major influence on the occult origins of Nazism, and in turn, some elements of all of those that milieu have also become explicitly Nazi. Note my use of the term elements. Continuing. Lewis received a formal Rosicrucian initiation at Toulouse in 1909, but he also laid emphasis on the arrival of traditional Rosicrucians in North America in the 1690s. He was versed in theosophical lore concerning rounds, root races, and Aryans, and also held the ancient Egyptians in great esteem, especially Akhenaten. By the way, I would note that Akhenaten, who founded a sun cult in ancient Egypt, was also somebody who was revered by Savitri Devi, and someone who influenced Savitri Devi's occult philosophies. Continuing. From its Californian headquarters, comprising an entire city block built with sphinxes, domes, and porticos in San Jose, AMORC now runs a very successful non-profit educational foundation with tens of thousands of members worldwide seeking health, happiness, and human progress. Its influence in the New Age movement has been enormous. As a key volume in the AMORC Rosicrucian Library, Savitri Devi's book is always available, last reprinting in 1992. Please note this. Continuing. From the late 1960s onward, growing numbers of individuals began to dissent from the values and institutions of modern Western society. The hippie movement of 1965 through 73 celebrated drugs, Eastern religions, and other forms of exotic enlightenment against the, quote, false civilization, unquote, of denominational religion, reason, and industrial modernity. By the 1970s, there was more widespread concern about the unchecked exploitation of the Earth's limited resources, urbanization, and the destruction of the environment. The Marxist critique traced these ills to the power of the bourgeoisie and international capital, but these scapegoats were giving way to a broader condemnation of urban industrial culture by the 1980s. With the advent of the New Age movement, man was felt to have lost his roots in nature, leading an artificial life among machines and automated processes that robbed him of his humanity and a meaningful life. Rudolf Bahro, B-A-H-R-O, a leading left-wing green and an important New Age figure, identifies patriarchy, the Judeo-Christian religious tradition, and the entire rationalist and scientific praxis of the West as the root causes of man's alienation. Green thinkers are especially pessimistic about the effects of human population on nature. New advocates of Malthusianism, the doctrine that species proliferate until they exhaust their food resources, oppose liberal and Christian notions of aid to the needy. In the 1970s, there were widespread appeals for zero population growth or decline, if necessary, backed by repressive measures, especially in third world countries. The Environmental Fund, a prestigious international grouping, took the view that sending food aid to the hungry only encouraged their population growth. Other organizations like Zero Population Growth, the Campaign to Check the Population Explosion, and Planned Parenthood World Population also focused attention on the overbreeding in poor nations. Paul Ehrlich's bestseller The Population Bomb suggested tax penalties for childbearing and breaking off relations with a Vatican opposed to birth control. A rhetoric using inflammatory terms of violence, bomb, and explosion was matched by a contempt for humans, plague, unquote, and people pollute, unquote. By the way, all of those are in quotes. Continuing. Many ecologists identified the teeming colored races of Africa, Asia, and South America as the root cause of the world population problem. By the way, I don't want to be misunderstood again as implying that ecology is fascist, but there are some aspects of the ecological movement that are, and that's discussed in a two-part miscellaneous archive show available from Spitfire entitled Eco-fascism. Continuing. An extreme school of ecological catastrophism regards all human civilization as deleterious and evil. Such anti-humanist sentiment, coupled with an idealization of animals and nature, represents a break with liberal thought. Many radical ecologists believe that human population must be drastically reduced because humans have simply become too numerous, placing an intolerable burden upon their natural environment. Edward Cullenbach's novel Ecotopia, published in 1978, described a revolutionary ecological regime in the Pacific Northwest that secedes from the United States. Its ecocentric policy is enforced through a variety of repressive, violent, and exclusionary measures against any opposition. Once human beings are stigmatized as a threat to Mother Nature, Christian and Enlightenment notions of human equality and the sanctity of human life start to retreat. Nazi modes of thought concerning unfit life, unquote, the old, sick, and indigent, hierarchies of human value, and eugenic programs find ready acceptance among those who despair of mankind. The American movement of deep ecology betrays an uneasy resemblance to Savitri Devi's biocentric vision. Its precepts of community and cooperation are belied by romantic irrationalism and the assertion that all nature is equal. In his pioneering work, The Arrogance of Humanism, in 1978, the leading U.S. biocentrist David Ehrenfeld rejects the humanist foundation of modern life, denying that any part of nature has more value than another. Due to man's global health schemes, the pox virus is now an endangered species. Inspired by the Norwegian philosopher Arne Naess, N-A-E-S-S, Bill Duvall and George Sessions, both American professors, have publicized deep ecology and biocentrism as a fundamentalist movement opposed to the pragmatic approach of reform ecology. In their influential book Deep Ecology, published in 1985, man is regarded as a degenerate and artificial creature in painful opposition to wild, untamed nature. Only a radical reevaluation of human importance can avert the grim future of a teeming, polluted planet. Man must give up his privileged position as the lord of the earth and seek a new accommodation with nature at once harmonious, modest, and subordinate. And skipping down, more about the degree of confluence between the deep ecology movement and the fascist and Nazi philosophy of Savitri Devi, we read, "All nature has intrinsic worth and equality, and whatever science that remains should be non-dominating. But if Duvall, D-E-V-A-L-L, and Sessions couch deep ecology in gentle words, their biocentrist epigones use a sterner language. Dave Foreman, the founder of the radical movement Earth First, conflates romanticism and brutality in a manner reminiscent of Savitri Devi. Primitivist sentiments such as dream the bison back, sing the swan hither, unquote, and, quote, back to the Pleistocene, unquote, punctuate Foreman's views that starving Ethiopians should be left to die, and Malthus was right, quote, there are too many people on the earth, unquote. He agrees with Arne Naess that the Earth's human population should be reduced to about 100 million. Another contributor to his magazine has recommended a drastic 80% reduction in the global human population while praising AIDS as a valuable ecological weapon. The German Green leader Herbert Gruhl, G-R-U-H-L, has even echoed Savitri Devi's passion for nuclear destruction. Because only Westerners are amenable to birth control programs, the overcrowded peoples of the Third World will one day regard, quote, the atom bomb no longer as a threat, but as a liberation, unquote. And continuing with this line of analysis, left-wing writers have been the fiercest critics of deep ecology, which they accuse of smuggling fascist discourse into liberal society. Quote, people are S blank blank blank, unquote. A recent quote from the German eco magazine Instinkte illustrates the left-wing claim that biocentrism denies the moral basis of any human rights to equality and support. By rejecting man's claim to distinctiveness from animals and plants, either through spiritual transcendence or social consciousness, biocentrism reduces mankind to mere biomass, a burden on nature. And by blaming humanity collectively for ecological disaster, deep ecology deflects any critique of capitalism and authority, thereby frustrating genuine social emancipation. Skipping down, only by denying the special status of man and his anthropocentric traditions of Judaism, Christianity, humanism, and socialism can capitalism soften up democracy to accept the mass dying of third world populations, as well as the euthanasia of the elderly, ill, poor, and redundant in the rich North. Such a counter-transcendent strategy will facilitate the exploitation of human beings as raw material in 21st century industries based on genetic engineering, embryo farming, and cloning. Please note this, because I think this is something we have to be very careful about. Skipping down, more on this confluence between Savitri Devi's fascism and some elements of contemporary green thinking. Nature is divinized, man is relegated. The ultra-right-wing Noontide Press in California has recognized this receptivity to the Nazi religion of nature by bringing out a new edition of Savitri Devi's Impeachment of Man in 1991. presented by the publisher as an indictment of the values and mores of our modern, human-centered, quote, produce and consume society, unquote. The book attempts to popularize Savitri Devi's conviction that divinity manifests itself in all of nature, that man is nothing special, and that his recent ideas of universal equality and entitlement to prosperity at the expense of the rest of nature are fundamentally wrong. The beautiful tiger, the great banyan tree, the lithe felines, according to Savitri Devi, these are noble creatures, but not all, quote, two-legged mammals, unquote, qualify. Only the strong, intelligent Aryan is fit to survive in a redeemed biocentric order. The publisher's foreword gives a brief account of her life, mentioning her lifelong devotion to Nazism and her books in which, quote, she portrayed Hitler and National Socialism as expressions of transcendent spiritual truth, unquote. Such an edition is a telling example of the new entryism the far right is currently pursuing in its appeal to green and New Age audiences. But Savitri Devi's emphasis on nature and animal rights against the claims of mankind could evoke a wider response in mass urban society. Ecological sentiment often owes more to an urbanized lifestyle than any authentic awareness of nature. Skipping down. Nor is Savitri Devi's vision of the noble Aryan far removed from primitivist currents of New Age thought. The German folkish and youth movements in the period of 1890 to 1930 mixed paganism and nature worship with reverence for barbarian virtue. Ancient Germans, racial purity, and national revival were all bound up with the merits of nature. Many New Age groups rehearsed the native aspects of these Nazi precursors in a eulogy of the primitive. The movement began in the 1970s with European support for the cultural struggle of the North American Indians, but politics soon gave way to mythology. And skipping down, by the early 1980s, the enthusiasm for North American Indians and their ecological esoteric wisdom had spread to the ancient European tribes, the, quote, Indians of the West, unquote. In the New Age movement, there are now numerous groups devoted to reviving the wisdom of the ancient Celts and Teutons. Druids and old Germanic priest kings, witches, and priestesses now provide New Age precursors closer to home and Western identity. Books, workshops, and conferences on paganism, shamanism, runes, and magic proliferate. The Anglo-American Asatru Free Assembly and Odinists revived Neo-Germanic paganism, while in Germany Neo-Folkish groups such as the Bowden, G-O-D-E-N, and Armanenschaft, a revival of the Guido von List Society, swiftly reoriented themselves toward the New Age concern with feminism, ecology, and esoteric lore. The Aryan mysticism of Julius Evola was rediscovered by New Age publications. Nostalgia for a lost golden age and apocalyptic hopes of its revival recall the ideological foreground of earlier demands for fascist renewal. By the way, keep in mind Julius Evola. We're going to touch on him briefly in just a minute. Deep ecology, biocentrism, nature worship, and New Age paganism reflect a hostility towards Christianity, rationalism, and liberalism in modern society. Although these radical movements often have their roots in left-wing dissent, their increasing tendency toward myth and despair indicate their susceptibility to millenarian and mystical ideas on the far right. Neo-Nazi and fascist activists now actively seek to infiltrate the ecological and esoteric scene. The cybernetic encirclement of man and his complete divorce from nature could well foster a more fundamental alienation. In a congested and automated world, Savitri Devi's sentimental love of animals and hatred of the masses may find new followers. The pessimism of the Kali Yuga and her vision of a pristine new Aryan order possess a perennial appeal in times of uncertainty and change. And indeed, I think this is something people have to be very, very aware of. And again, I don't want to be misunderstood as characterizing all or most of either the New Age or the Green movement as fascistic, but there are some powerful elements of both that are indeed being seduced by fascism, and Savitri Devi's thought is in the foreground of those. Again, you heard reference to Julius Evola, last name capital E-V-O-L-A. He was a Nazi mystic who predicted a golden age if fascism ever triumphed. One sees his books now on the shelves of New Age bookstores. There's another fascist who is also becoming influential, I should say, in certain New Age circles, and that is a fellow named Albert Pike. Albert Pike was a Confederate general in World War II, in the American Civil War, excuse me. He also was in charge of military intelligence for the Confederate armies. And Albert Pike, just like another Confederate general, Nathan Bedford Forrest, was a disciple of an occultist named Eliphas Levi. Depending on who you talk to, he has been characterized as a Satanist, but whether or not he was, the fact of the matter is that General Nathan Bedford Forrest and General Albert Pike were disciples of his, and Albert Pike has become influential in New Age circles. And Nathan Bedford Forrest and Albert Pike, the New Age icon, or at least the icon in certain New Age circles, were the co-founders of the Ku Klux Klan. And when the co-founder of the Ku Klux Klan is influential in certain New Age circles, I think it is time to pay very, very close attention to the seduction of a number of different types of philosophies, in particular people involved with the occult, by fascism. The various tapes that I've done, including many tapes about connections between the occult and fascism, are available from a tape duplication service called Spitfire. That's one word, capital S-P-I-T-F-I-R-E. They're located at P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, capital B-E-N, capital L-O-M-O-N-D, zip code 95005. The email address for Spitfire is spitfire@ix.netcom.com. Once again, that's Spitfire, P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, 95005, spitfire@ix.netcom.com. There's a list of and description of the various tapes available from Spitfire on the Spitfire website at spitfirelist.com. That is equipped with real audio. People can email me at my home base station, KFJC-FM, in the South San Francisco Bay Area at demory@kfjc.org. That's demory@kfjc.org. Please note that I don't have time to answer correspondence even by email, so please don't feel insulted. I'm just burdened in terms of time and resources. That concludes this half-hour segment. My name's Dave Emery. Thanks for listening. 47-3110-4. We're going to begin by taking a look at some material from a publication a publication that is issued by Samizdat Publishers. That's capital S-A-M-I-S-D-A-T. That's a Nazi publishing house that is run by a fellow named Ernst Zundel, a German expatriate who lives in Canada, last name capital Z-U-umlaut-N-D-E-L. Zundel is one of the most prolific of the new Nazi publishers, and in 1982 he helped to publicize the activities of Savitri Devi in his Samizdat publication. Turning to Hitler's Priestess by Nicholas Goodrich Clark, we read, in late 1982, Ernst Zundel, the founder-proprietor of the neo-Nazi Samizdat Publishers in Toronto, publicized the availability of a set of 5 two-hour cassettes of live interviews with Savitri Devi and a brand-new edition of her out-of-print classic, The Lightning in the Sun, published in 1958. The notice was mailed worldwide on card flyers, and it is worth quoting in its breathless entirety. And here is the quote. The Hitler cult revealed. Discovered alive in India. Hitler's guru. For serious students of the occult. You can now purchase the complete set of tape cassettes recorded live interviews, tape cassette recorded Savitri Devi's huge illustrated 448-page illumination of occult Nazi wisdom and prophecy. The Samizdat publicity was a resounding finale to a long and eventful life begun early in the century in the beautiful old wall city of Lyon in France. And skipping down, Samizdat's presentation of Savitri Devi was evidently part of this strategy designed to entice new audiences with the neo-Nazi message. Ancient mythology and pyramid secrets, Eastern religion, vegetarianism, and green ideas, the very currency of the burgeoning New Age with its interest in exotic religion, spiritual truths, and a worship of nature, could be exploited as bait for the young, unwary, or simply curious. By the late 1970s, the historical experience of the Third Reich was quickly receding into the past. As popular literature and films ably demonstrated, Nazism was becoming something mythical, even fantastic, and also plastic, that could be molded and combined with novel associations and thereby given new meanings. By republishing the work of Savitri Devi, Zundel aimed to create a new cultic interest in Hitler, linking him to ancient mysteries, the world of nature, and powerful religious symbols drawn from the Orient. Her ideas have since built unlikely bridges between neo-Nazism and the New Age. Savitri Devi viewed nature in the Hindu fashion, live interviews with Hitler guru Savitri Devi at her home in India. Here, in her own words, the narration of a prophetic pilgrimage along the edge of the cosmic abyss. Watch the clouds of evil scatter under the lightning of cosmic justice and the sun of cosmic truth. Read her shocking and most recently published manuscript, The Lightning in the Sun, which exposes the tangled roots of Nazism for all to see. Discover through her the secret Nazi pyramid connection with Pharaoh Akhenaten and the ancient cult of the sun. Learn the real significance of Genghis Khan's evil role in history, his incredible significance in the present. Discover the hidden springs of Hitler's manic will to power, his mystical bond with the dark forces of time and destiny. Pursue the outlines of evil in its awesome cosmic context. Decipher now the encoded workings of the Nazi mind. Perceive how Hitler saw the workings of the universe through human sacrifice, vegetarianism, Aryanism, the cyclic view of history, the children of violence, the will to survive and to conquer, the seed of truth, gods on earth, Kalki the Avenger. Were ancient Sanskrit laws of the universe compiled in the Bhagavad Gita the secret source of Nazi strength? The amazing answers to these riddles are now at hand. Read them in The Lightning in the Sun, Hitler Guru. Hello, my name's Dave Emery, and in the next 2 half-hour segments, we're going to revisit a topic that I've dealt with in the past, namely the Third Reich's connections to the occult, and beyond that, some connections between neo-Nazism, or so-called neo-Nazism, and aspects of the New Age and the occult. We're also going to be taking a look at some aspects of the history of the Third Reich and why it has been able to survive into the present time. In the interests of time, because we do have a lot of material to cover, I'm going to get right into the subject material. We're going to be talking for the next 2 half hours about a woman named Savitri Devi. Her name is spelled capital S-A-V-I-T-R-I, last name capital D-E-V-I. Although of European birth, she was something of an Indianophile, to coin a term. She was very much taken with India, which she saw as a prototype of, quote, Aryan, unquote, civilization, and she became wooed to the Nazi cause. Her biography was authored by Nicholas Goodrick Clark, last name capital G-O-O-D-R-I-C-K hyphen C capital C-L-A-R-K-E, and Nicholas Goodrick Clark has written a very important book called Hitler's Priestess, Savitri Devi, the Hindu-Aryan Myth, and Neo-Nazism. The book was published in hardcover by New York University Press, copyright 1998. The ISBN number is 0-81, as a violent pageant of creation and destruction in which man held no special rights. A cloyingly sentimental love of animals stood in marked contrast to her misanthropic contempt for non-Aryan humans, the weak, and the infirm. Himmler and Rosenberg, among other leading Nazis, also combined a concern for animals with their monstrous blueprints to eliminate all, quote, unworthy, unquote, human life. The Impeachment of Man, 1959, her book devoted to a thoroughgoing rejection of the man-centered creeds of Judaism and Christianity, was republished by the far-right Noontide Press in America in 1991. Interrupting, that is the publishing arm of the Nazi Liberty Lobby organization. Its best-known publication is the Spotlight newspaper, not to be confused with the British Searchlight. Similar name, the British Searchlight, however, is anti-fascist. Continuing. Here, the brutality of social Darwinism meets both the green cult of nature and the antisocial excesses of animal rights activists. Again, the amoral worship of beauty and force implicit in Nazi thinking finds new alliances with Hinduism, the cult of Shiva, and deep ecology, that radical current of ecological thought that condemns modern man as the scourge of nature. Savitri Devi was a French woman of Greek-English birth who would become an admirer of German National Socialism in the late